She never did anything.
I find a way to do stuff like that.
It's very near and dear to St. Paul's Church in the village of Flatbush. We met, we got in touch with the J.C. Flowers Foundation Circle of Support, I think back in 2016. And today we are part of the Circles of Support. And we have Thomas and his team, and their information is here in our folders. So I am very thrilled and excited and privileged to welcome J.C. Flowers Foundation Social Circles of Support, Raising My Voice, and Raising My Voice Again, Mr. Thomas Edwards.
Thank you, Paul. You should clap when I'm leaving. Thank you for that. I appreciate it. And thank you for having us. And I'm really happy to be here today. As Father Hamlin mentioned, I work for J.C. Flowers Foundation Circles of Support, which is the reentry organization. And we mainly work with formerly incarcerated people and their families, people returning to the community. And it came about because Chris Flowers, who runs this, happens to be a billionaire and uses his own money. So he was doing work in Africa with malaria. And somebody asked him, well, why don't you do something where you live at? And so he went, when you're a billionaire, you can go ask the governor, like, what should I do? And the governor said, well, there's a problem with people coming out of prison and being re-entered into society. And so he created Circles of Support. And what it is a support base for people coming home. And one of the programs is Raising My Voice, which allows formerly incarcerated persons to tell their own stories. What happens to you when you become part of these systems, whether they're juvenile or criminal systems, other people narrate your story, they tell your story. For instance, I read a probation report that was formed when I was 17 years old. And I read this many years later in prison when I was preparing for the parole board. And what it said was that I was an unwanted child. And this person never met my mother, never talked to anybody in my family, but he made this conclusion from talking to me in 10 minutes. And this followed me for the rest of my life that I didn't even know about. So what Raising My Voice does is allows you to narrate your own story. My story is much different than the one he wrote on that paper. So we created this program so people could look at their lives, and it's a way to kind of reflect on some things and maybe change some things when you create your story. And by the same token, when I went to prison, my mother went with me too, because she wanted to visit. She was worried about me, my sister, my children. So we also have what we call Raising My Voice Kin, where family members get to talk about their experience. Because a lot of people don't realize when you visit people in prison, it's like you're treated like a prisoner. As a woman, you may have to take off your bra, underwire bra, and give it to a male officer in a paper bag. Like, these are things you go through constantly just to be part of that person's life. So that's why these programs are so important to support, because it allows people to come home and re-enter society as productive citizens. And what we brought is a collection of different perspectives and stories. And these people, these are lived experience. And this is basically a way to share these things without other people having to go through it. And because of the traumatic things that happen, we have also a program called Talk to Me, which works for formerly incarcerated, people impacted by incarceration, whether family or themselves. And it's a support group that meets once a week and talk. They go on trips, they go on retreats, and it just helps them build up and continue to help their family members get through the time. And so what we have is a collection of our speakers that will definitely let you know what this program is about, and also their lives and what happened in their lives. And usually there's always a moment where people make a change. For instance, when I went to prison, I spent 21 years in prison. And for the first 10 years, I did what I always did, crime. I didn't volunteer to go to prison. I didn't wake up one day and say, listen, take me to prison, I want to change. I got caught, I got shackled, and I got taken to prison. And nothing else changed in my life. So I didn't change. But at one point in my time, my mother passed away. I was in solitary confinement, and I decided this wasn't working. Like this thing that has allowed me to survive is not working. And I need to learn to live. And I didn't know what to do. I had a 6th grade education. I had no idea what I would do, but I decided what I wouldn't do, and that would be crime. And that changed my life and allowed me to go on and do a lot of other things. And that's how I'm here today. So I want to, take up no more time and get right to these stories, which are amazing. And at the end, you can have all the questions you want, but we want everybody to tell their story first, and then we'll do questions and answers, all right? Thank you. And with that, I give you Daniel Kelly. And you read his bio, he went to Bronx High School of Science, so he's really smart, because I've always had a dream that I should have went there. But I'm very glad to introduce Daniel. Thank you.
Thank you, Thomas. Good morning, everyone. It's amazing. Thank you for having me. Thank you for having us. I should have been arranging the details of my high school senior trip. Instead, I was being arraigned on 2 counts of 2nd-degree murder and an array of charges stemming from robberies my older brother and I had committed. The year was 1990, and I, 17 years old, decided to quit school and pursue fast money. It seemed to me at the time that all the girls liked the guys who had money, guys who had jewelry, a car, or an extensive wardrobe. They got all the action. Me, I didn't check any of those boxes. So I decided to get myself a job at McDonald's in hopes of making myself a more interesting catch. I would literally angle my locker door so I could put my work uniform in so no one would see that all too recognizable striped shirt and gray pants. I was miserable. I couldn't talk to my parents about what I was going through because they had values that wouldn't allow for them to pay $100 for sneakers. I knew at that point that the relationship between my parents and myself was suffering. I became secretive and resentful. My older brother, who had done a previous prison sentence as a child, would playfully laugh at my attempts to be stylish while working at McDonald's. I was miserable. My brother got tired of me begging, so after telling me one day to stop begging, he showed me a gun and he said, "As long as I've got this, I'll never be broke." One of the most important things to me at that time was to never let my brother think that I was afraid of anything. So I took the gun and went on to do the unthinkable with him. By the time the dust had settled, 2 people lay dead and 1 person was seriously injured. I clearly remember being more afraid of my parents finding out about my arrest than the police themselves. I was fingerprinted, booked, photographed, and placed on a bus to Rikers Island. Life as I knew it was ending, and the 22-year to life sentence that I would eventually get was just starting. My hard new state boots and stiff green uniform literally screamed New Jack. My last name and ID number was printed on a label and ironed onto all the pants, shirts, and coat I was given by the state. I remember using a pen to cross out my 92 number because I didn't want guys to think that I was new. Being new brought problems and predators that I wasn't ready for. But as time passed, though, I didn't find it as important to cross out my 92 number because I was getting more familiarized with the ways of the penitentiary. The older residents used to tell me not to ever refer to another person, another resident, as an inmate. See, according to them, that term inmate was given to guys by their captors. It was a hated term, one that should never be used by anyone other than the guards. And I embraced those teachable moments because they dealt directly with my prison experience and would allow me to make my time less difficult. I sought out and valued opportunities wherein I could learn something new. So years into my prison sentence, I got the opportunity to attend a self-help group made up of volunteers who would come in and promote discourse among the residents. These volunteers, the Spiritus Christi organization, a church in Rochester, New York, posed a question to the group one day. Dave, a Spiritus Christi volunteer, was the evening's moderator. Dave was an older guy. He was tall and unassuming with a firm handshake. He said that we're each going to try and exercise. He said that we're all going to describe who we are without mentioning what we do. This was pretty tough for me because I wasn't used to describing myself outside of my prison job. When it was my turn to address the group, I remember starting off by saying what I wasn't. I wasn't a rat. I wasn't a rapist. I didn't victimize children or old people. I thought I was really rolling at that time when Dave stopped me and said, whoa, well, that's cool in here. But who were you before all this? He used himself as an example to point out that his hobby was woodworking, and he was a devoted father and husband. His wife and children valued his thoughtfulness and dependability. His consistency in exhibiting thoughtfulness and dependability made it easy for him to be seen as more than just a carpenter. As intelligent as I thought I was, I sat quietly and really thought about the idea of self-definition. Here was this old white guy telling a convicted murderer the importance of being able to properly define myself. I had already sat in front of 3 parole boards, so I figured, I got this. But little did I know, I didn't have this. This was something I had to get comfortable with. Defining myself outside of my criminal acts was something I had to be with. I had to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. Sounds confusing, but interacting with guys there who had no interest in self-reflection soon became my ongoing practice session. What I would later learn would be my final days in prison came and went. I stopped attending the Spiritus Christi group and just spent my days in the law library. I wasn't told to pack up on the day it was time for me to go. So I gave away everything aside from my pictures and important paperwork. The day I had been waiting for my whole life had finally gotten here. I felt like a politician that morning. I was glad handing my friends and trying to provide hope for guys that were still gonna be there. Of course, there were guys who wanted my more high-end items like cassettes and my radio and headphones, but they had to be satisfied with more mundane items like soap, deodorant, and snacks. I thought I was all set when this guy, he walked up to me and he said, so how does it feel to be a civilian? I used to think there was no way I could be a civilian. See, civilians only work there. Not only did I work there, I ate there, showered there, slept there, woke up there every day. But now that I would no longer sleep there, I couldn't be defined by what I did or where I lived. So Dave's exercise on self-definition meant that I control how I'm defined, not my past actions. Words have power. So now my defining moment has been an ongoing one for some time. Today, I am a civilian. I pay taxes. I vote. I abide by the laws of the land. And I try to carve out a bit of happiness for my family and my friends, my loved ones, every day. It's an all-access pass I have now to humanity that I value. An all-access pass that was granted to me through the power of discovery and self-definition. And to think my opportunity to be introduced to self-reflection through storytelling was made possible by the Raising My Voice Collective, by the J.C. Flowers organization, and the circles of support. Faith-based organizations continue to have an integral role in addressing the problem of mass incarceration. I stand before you today because of a single word: praxis. Praxis is combining your faith with vocation. It's easy to believe something. It's easy. But try doing something that is combined with that faith, with that belief. That raises the quality of your belief, your actions. So hope and determination, when faith and vocation is combined, things happen. I happen. I am because you are. Now I have the time to reflect on the things I've done. Through the power of storytelling, I've learned how important it is to warrant forgiveness, because I was in a dark place for a very long time for actions that I committed. I could have been lost, but through the power of praxis, you came to me when I was in prison. You taught me the importance of mercy and forgiveness, and not just because I wanted it, but because I needed to forgive myself to be worthy of forgiveness. You taught me that. Faith-based organizations taught me that. So to now incorporate it in my life has been a wondrous thing. It has given me that all-access pass to humanity. So I'm not looking to commit criminal acts, no. I'm looking to add on to that humanity. I'm looking to add to that all-access pass because I have it. I have it because you've allowed me to have it. I thank you all for letting me share. Thank you.
I don't even know what to say. So I'm gonna just introduce our next speaker. Warner, please share your story. Because these are different aspects. When you hear a story, you'll understand why 3 people were brought in today to talk.
Thank you. Good afternoon, and again, thank you for having me this afternoon. Good afternoon. I am a child of God, a wife, a mother, daughter, sister, friend, and a woman with a passion for the investigation of the wrongly convicted. I realize as a woman, we tend to wear many hats. I began to change my hats to perfect my skills. Having a passion for investigative work, I enjoyed watching Perry Mason, Hill Street Blues, and Cagney and Lacey. Watching shows that had anything to do with the criminal justice system led me to work for the New York City Police Department as
A little louder, please, for the back row.
okay. Watching shows that had anything to do with the criminal justice system led me to work for the New York City Police Department as a police administrative aide, where I would learn the process of what happens during the individual's first contact with the police. I needed more, which led me to the New York City Department of Corrections, allowing me to speak to individuals and learn their stories. I would earn a bachelor's degree in criminal justice, human services from the University of Phoenix to help me in my quest for justice for the wrongfully convicted. I was fortunate to land a position as a community leader with releasing aging people in prison, which has connected me to various organizations, helping me with the fight for justice. My mission is to mediate for the victims of crime, but also for justice for those not guilty. I am married to Curtis Tucker. Curtis has been incarcerated for 34 years for a crime he did not commit. Unfortunately, one of the victims that was killed was Curtis's cousin, daughter, who would never get a chance to see his daughter grow up because she was 1 month old when her father was murdered. God would have it, after 33 years, Curtis would meet the daughter of his slain cousin through the work I do as a community leader. Curtis and I met when we were teenagers. Little did we know we would embark on a long fight for justice for his freedom. Curtis's wrongful conviction pushed me to want to help him and many others. Trying to understand the unbalance of the legal scale that is modern day slavery. This journey came with many ups and downs, but just like Moses had Aaron and Hur, we had each other when we felt like giving up. But what happens to the innocent individual who becomes a pawn in this legal system that states innocent until proven guilty? What happens to the victims and their families? Is there a way to fight for justice for the innocent, the victims and their families, as well as the offender? My fight for justice denied is for all who may have encountered blind justice, which is restorative justice that opens the doors for new beginnings to bring about healing, reconnecting, and reconciliation. There were many times I just wanted to throw my hands up and say, I'm over it. But God would not let that happen. At times, I felt like I was on the yellow brick road. And on my way, he would drop people in my path. I have had many tin mans, scarecrows, and lions to help me on this journey. The yellow brick road was paved for my calling, allowing me to take every nugget and deposited it into my fight for justice denied. This horrendous crime has caused pain for all. Yet there was always that thought of how his cousin's daughter was doing. This was so touchy because Curtis had 2 young children of his own. The difference was Curtis was Curtis' children were able to grow with their dad through prison walls. But his cousin's daughter could only rely on the stories that were told to her because of a cowardless murderer. 33 years later, I am now realizing the true meaning for fighting for justice for all people, victims, offenders, the innocent, and communities. The dynamics of our story began to change when I received a text message from a young lady asking for help with a loved one who was wrongfully arrested. What makes this story extraordinary was because when I saw the young lady's name pop up on my caller ID, I became curious. Her name was the name that I knew to be of my husband's slain cousin's daughter. I have now switched to my investigator hat, contacting the young lady and asked what she knew about me and what was she looking for from me. I began to ask questions like what was her parents' name and her birthday. I knew the answers to all the questions already, but as she shared her answers, I knew that she was the victim's daughter. My heart dropped. I was nervous. I was on an emotional roller coaster. I proceeded to tell her that I needed to share something with her, but I could not do it over the phone. We decided to meet that evening. My feelings were all over the place. Could this be a setup? I decided not to go to her apartment. We would go to a diner instead. The look on her face and mine were two women not sure of what was about to take place. We smiled a nervous smile. Then I suggested that we pray first. Once we prayed, I asked her, did her friend tell her anything about my husband? She said the only thing she said is that you do the work because your husband has been incarcerated for a very long time. I told her the reason I wanted to sit face to face because I wanted to talk about my husband and her father. I told her my husband has been incarcerated for 33 years for a crime he did not commit. Immediately, the young lady stopped me with tears in her eyes and asked me if my name was Tucker. My next question would be, do you know who I am? Her response would be, now I do. I will be 33 years old and he has been incarcerated my whole life. Through the tears, she told me, I know he didn't do it. I have heard the stories. She and I would talk for 3 hours at this diner. At one point, she said to me, I would like to meet him. And I said, who would you like to meet? She said, your husband. Before we left, she said that she felt something when I mentioned I needed to speak to her in person. She went on to say that I will be 33 years old in a few months. Jesus finished his assignment at 33 years old. I am getting my new life with closure through this reunion. My next assignment was to share with my husband what had happened when I met the young lady. The next day, the two of them would speak on the phone. It was an emotional conversation as they both cried. My husband told her how sorry he was not able to save her dad. She asked could she call him by his nickname and expressed how she wanted to meet the whole family. They both ended the conversation with stating that they loved each other and that this was the beginning of restoring family. Today, the young lady, Curtis, and I have built a relationship, a lifelong relationship. Our fight is not over. Curtis is still incarcerated for a crime he did not commit. But the fact that he survived a horrific crime, our fight is with the Brooklyn DA's office. Curtis' case is like many we read and see about today, when the system abuses their power to put away Black and brown people for the sake of getting a conviction. Unfortunately, because Curtis' case is currently being viewed, I am unable to go into detail. What matters is the relationship has formed. I am grateful for the organizations of RAP, People's Campaign for Justice, Touchdown NYC, Broadway Advocacy and Coalition, my local politicians, faith-based leaders, family and friends, and the media who have given me the materials, letters of support, showing up and meeting with me, teaching me how to write to get our story heard. When I wrote this story about a year ago, that was the end of my story, as far as I thought. But God would have it, on August 3rd, I was able to obtain us getting Curtis back into court through many meetings and phone calls with the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. On August 3rd, the judge decided that Curtis should be sentenced to 15 years to life instead of 35 years to life, which meant that Curtis became eligible for parole immediately. As of today, Curtis is still incarcerated. On Tuesday, October 25th, Curtis will go before the board, and my prayer, because I know the God I serve, Curtis will be released this year. Thank you for listening to our story.
Congratulations.
Thank
I
you.
just know it's coming. We will add our prayers to yours.
Thanks.
I do wanna.
This is real like intimate, right? Real close. But it's so important to hear these stories from different parts of what happened to people and the way they connect people. And I think next one, I would say we saved the best for last, but all of them was the best. So you're getting a real treat today because each story carries a certain impact and a certain message as well. And a lot of it is hope and resiliences and you know, keep building and keep going. And that's what faith is. And with that, I give you Carol E.
Thank you. I apologize.
No problem.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for welcoming us and inviting us out here, you know, to address a faith-based community. You know, sometimes, you know, you don't know what to expect when you tell your story in front of faith-based people, because like the church I go to is full of faith-based members, but everybody doesn't understand people having been incarcerated, or it's such a shameful part of their own history that they pretend that they don't understand it because they don't want to, you know, visit what it feels like to have a loved one of their own incarcerated. So again, I just thank you all for allowing us to be here with no judgment. I named my story The Incarcerated Womb. As I drifted in and out of sleep during the ride to the Rock, I thought, at least I'm finally going to get some rest and my baby will be born clean. I've been trying to quit crack for years. I thought if I were pregnant, I'd finally be able to stop for the sake of my baby. I didn't realize that if I couldn't stop using for me, I couldn't stop using for anyone else. Anyway, this was going to be my second time on Rikers Island in 4 months. It was there that I found that I was pregnant. I did 40 days at that time and came out to find that I was homeless and didn't have any idea where I was going to take my baby. I just knew I wanted her so badly. My older daughter, Katrina, was 9 years old, but she'd lived with an aunt since I started freebasing 4 years earlier. I had always wanted a second child. Using drugs hadn't changed that, and at that time, I didn't realize the effect it could have on my baby. When I got to Rikers, things had changed. The women were no longer housed in the same facility as the men. Before, the women were kept in a dorm in the HDM, House of Detention for Men. It was not a very welcoming place. The guards were so stern. We had to stand against the wall whenever men were passing in the hallway. We only got out for meals, medical, and commissary. Now, there was a new facility that had been built especially for us. It was called the Rose M. Singer Center. It came with a story, too. The women who had been in the HDM just 2 months earlier said they had had a ribbon cutting and the whole 9 yards. The donor of the new facility was a little old lady who had ridden on the back of the corrections buggy on opening day. This lady, Miss Rosie, was the heir to the Singer sewing machine fortune and had given them money to have this jail built. I laughed when I heard that story and said if I ever saw her, I would thank her for being so kind. It was a nice facility though. As far as jails go, everything was clean and new. It had an electric stove where we made toast and coffee, and 2 washing machine dryer sets, so we didn't have to wash our clothes in those nasty buckets anymore. The same ones we used to scrub the floors. What's more, Rosie was brightly lit, not dark and dismal. Each of us had her own cell with a window and a door. When I saw where they were placing me, I was grateful. I said to myself, it's not a dorm. The dorms were always loud from wake up until lights out. Now I could close my cell door whenever I wanted and get some rest. I was placed in the pregnancy unit. It was like a perpetual visit to the clinic where all of us moms talked about our bellies and our babies, what you were going to name her, the plans you had made for her if you were going upstate. Some of the women planned to take their babies with them, but others had family who was going to care for them. I decided to keep my baby with me in the nursery and take her home when I left. I was finally getting the chance to reset my life and get over that addiction thing that I felt resulted from being abandoned by both my parents at an early age, being emotionally and physically abused as a kid, the repeated sexual abuse culminating in a pregnancy and abortion at 15 years old, and the domestic violence that came in my relationships, you know, the usual cocktail. But I was really excited about my prospects for the future. In this scope, the Rosie's environment was almost normal. We watched TV and used the phone. We got all the food we wanted at each meal and a snack at night. It treated the pregnant women very differently. I mean, you could actually forget you were in jail. And in the middle of the day, it was quiet when we took our naps. None of the officers woke us up to stand beside the bed when we were on the count. They just counted us as we slept. During this detention, I visited the prenatal clinic at East Elmhurst Hospital twice, and each time I was shackled. I was led from the corrections van, attached by my chains, to the other women who also had appointments. I was going to see the obstetrician for what should have been a happy and excited follow-up on the condition of my pregnancy and the health of my baby, instead of what was always an embarrassing trek through the hospital onto the elevator while other patients, visitors, and staff stared at those handcuffs. And when they glanced at my swollen belly, I could see the contempt in their eyes. Though I loved each chance I got to see my baby on the sonogram and hear her heartbeat, I dreaded that contemptible walk of shame that accompanied it. I went into labor early on December 23rd and was taken from Rikers Island by the corrections van, not an ambulance, to the same hospital. Although I was in active labor with extreme pains, I was still shackled for the commute, so it was very difficult for me to move around in the throes of labor. Each time the driver turned or stopped, I had to brace myself so I wouldn't slide around or hit my belly. It was exhausting to do this on top of the pain. Thankfully, we finally reached the hospital. I thought, they'll surely take these awkward cuffs off now, but it was not to be. They stayed on even when I received an epidural, which numbed me from the waist down. I remained shackled to the birthing bed by one hand throughout labor, in and out of consciousness. When I was ready to give birth, the doctor awakened me and told me it was time to start pushing. I couldn't feel anything except the pressure of my baby's head crowning. All of this just goes to prove that I was not a flight risk and didn't need to remain shackled throughout what should have been one of the most loving and natural experiences a woman and her baby can have, but instead became a very traumatic one. As I began to push, I looked into the eyes of a correction officer standing directly behind the doctor, witnessing my child's entrance into the world of the criminal justice system. Throughout the next 2 days, I remained cuffed to the bed, needing help getting my baby, Jamil, into my arms to hold her, to feed her, and to get her back into the bassinet. My brother Ray came to see me and was only allowed to stay for a little while, not for a regular visit like the other 3 mothers in the room. They too stared at those chains of conviction. Not having more time with Ray hurt as well. It began so lovely. I felt normal like the other mothers until they told him he had to leave after only 5 minutes. We were so close, and he was happy to be an uncle again. He kept telling me how much Jamil looked like me when I was little. He was right. She did look a lot like me. She still does. She acts like me too. Very determined and ambitious. She wrote an award-winning docudrama called The Bond, which is presently making its way through the film festivals. It's the tale of her birth. Through therapy, we're healing, and I'm really grateful she finally got some acceptance with her birth story. Anyway, I signed up for the nursery program at Rose M. Singer. Staff screened the women to determine which of us would be eligible to keep their babies with them in jail until release or transfer upstate. If the mother passed the interview and background check, she was accepted into the program. At the time, women being detained for a violent crime didn't qualify. Then the mother was allowed to bring her baby back to Rikers with her after giving birth and live in the nursery. If she was sent to a prison with a similar program, her child could possibly accompany her there as well. When it was time for me to leave the hospital to return to jail, my sweet baby was snatched from my arms, placed in a bassinet, and rolled away to a nurse by a very apathetic correction officer. I began crying and screaming for my child. It was a very traumatic event. Between sobs, I kept telling the officer that I was taking her back to Rikers with me and refused to get dressed. At the time, I felt that keeping Jamil with me for the remaining 6 months of my sentence would help us to bond and stop me from returning to drug use. However, the officer didn't have any paperwork for her and just wanted me to get dressed so I could be discharged. I said, "Call Rikers, please call Rikers." The nurse witnessing this asked the officer to allow me some time to calm down and hold Jamil once more and say goodbye. She may have felt this would calm my hysterics. Yet, this woman refused, stating that it was Christmas and she just wanted to get home to her own family, adding, if she really wanted to keep her baby in the first place, she wouldn't be in jail. After a while, the nurse convinced me that I could come back the next day to visit Jamil, perhaps even bring her back to Rikers with me. All along, the officer kept threatening to write me up for refusing orders. Eventually, I got dressed, reshackled, and returned to Rosie's, crying all the way there and into the night. So Ray picked Jamil up from the hospital, taking her home to be cared for by him and his wife. She was with them until I was released 6 months later. But upon gaining my freedom, I believe, due to our separation and yet another traumatizing experience, the bond was frayed. All I thought about for the rest of my bid was getting high. I worked and saved my money, spending very little of it in the commissary. When I left jail, I had over $200 in my pocket. I detoured my cab to the cop spot on the way home and was right back off to the races. I didn't go get Jamil until the next day, but by then, the disease of addiction had regained its grasp on me. After only 2 weeks, Ray had to come and get Jamil again for her own safety, and I didn't get her back until she was 13. Turns out she couldn't keep me clean. If only I knew where and how to get the help I needed way back then, I might have been able to care for my children. For years, Jamil refused to believe this was the story of her birth. I mean, Who can easily accept coming into the world under such horrendous conditions? My child didn't deserve this, and neither did I. If the Department of Corrections is all about rehabilitation, then why couldn't I go to a more rehabilitative setting? Please allow addicted mothers to go to alternative to incarceration treatment instead of jails. Thank you.
We can open up for questions now if you would like.
Questions?
Is your brother incarcerated with you or elsewhere? Or?
Yes. He's serving 58 1/3 to life because he went to trial and he blew trial. I did not. I copped out. I took that plea bargain. Yo, let me out.
In the back.
You all really demonstrated the power of narrative.
We can't hear you, Fred.
I think you all just demonstrated the power of narrative, and that's maybe why we're kind of silent.
And I want to point out, you had a question about his brother, was he incarcerated? And he pointed out that he took a plea deal, which made it easier for his conviction. He said, I'm guilty. However, it shouldn't matter. I mean, if you go to trial, it's your right to go to trial. You shouldn't be punished more because you took that right. It's a case in New York State where a guy was offered 3 to 9 for a police killing that he didn't do. He was a getaway driver. He was in a car, said he didn't know what was happening. But because he wouldn't take the 3 to 9, he went to trial. He got 25 to life. So if they thought he should only get 3 to 9 in the beginning, how in the end did that turn into 25 to life for his role? Because there's something wrong with this system. It's unbalanced.
And just to piggyback off of Thomas, like I said, my husband was wrongfully convicted. However, they offered him for a double homicide and attempted murder. I believe it was 6 to 12. You don't offer anybody 6 to 12 for 2 bodies and attempted murder. So they knew this is the system.
They knew he was innocent.
I have another question in my mind. How did you find this support organization? Did they come to you in while you were still incarcerated?
I found circles of support through a sister of mine. I belong to a faith-based committee of Justice for Women Task Force, which was a committee in itself that was gathered while the COVID was going on, and we were hearing about women in Rose M. Singer contracting COVID from officers who were working. And so we started writing to the governor and asking them to release women who were not convicted of any crimes, but were there being held because they couldn't afford bail for minor crimes as well. And at the time, Governor Cuomo, he started it, and then it continued with Governor Hochul. But he started releasing men and women in the city and in the state who were like at high risk. Some of them had a high risk. Some of them had children at home and didn't have, like, say for instance, my kids are staying with my mother. My mother gets COVID, and my kids are about to go into the foster care system. He started to have what do you call compassionate release, and the women and men would be able to go home with an ankle monitor, but they were released so that they had less of a chance of catching COVID and dying, because people were dying behind the bars who were not convicted of any crimes. They were just being held there, being detained, and it was in essence a death sentence if some of them caught COVID. So, okay, I'm sorry. So there's a faith-based committee that's attached to that organization. And one of the sisters, she told me, Carol, I'm in this writing group and I get to tell my story. And, it's just so relieving. And so when she graduated, she told me to come to the graduation, and it was online, and I was impressed with everybody being able to tell their story their way. And so I asked, the next cycle I joined.
I was introduced to Circus of Sport from releasing aging people in prison. One of the other community leaders, she had mentioned it to me. And when I had time, because originally I didn't have time, and I joined them, and it's like the best thing that ever happened for me since throughout this whole ordeal that I've been through for 34 years.
I was introduced to the circles of support and raising my voice collective through Miss Linda Steele, who is aware of not only the problems of incarceration, but has a personal story in and of itself.
Yeah.
And here goes this word again, praxis. Because when you introduce something like that to me, and again, here it goes again, I thought I was intelligent. I thought I was, I thought I had a grasp on what's going on. But you had someone who not only believes in a higher power, but believes in combining that belief with efforts to make something happen in the society we live. So I was empowered through her. You've got a story to tell, buddy. It's not a war story. It's not standing on a corner talking trash with your friends. Speak to empower someone else. You have all the elements of that. Do it. And it worked for me. It worked for me. So I understood that and I grasped it wholeheartedly. And I'm thankful for it.
What does your group need from us, from people like us? What walk can we walk to help?
Well, I think when you look at, the history, when you're dealing with incarceration, I mean, you go to the Bible and talk about visiting those in prison. See, what you need is faith, and you already have that. And he talking about practice, that's putting it in actions. And what you need is to connect with people. When I first went to the village of Fatbush, the church and to speak, I mean, I didn't know what to expect. And I'm gonna be honest with you, when we first walked in, people wasn't very friendly to us. They didn't know us. But as time went on, it changed. And I mean, one of the speakers took them to task about that. And I was unhappy with that because I had to speak behind her. So I didn't like her making the audience, like on edge, but it was true. Like, this is a house where we should be accepted. Like, this is where we come to say, I know I did something, but let's not forget how it started out. See, nobody here woke up and said they wanted to commit crime. They wanted to do these things. Some things happen, and things happen to people. So what we need is some understanding, some way that we can still be regular people. Compassion, empathy, like we need to just be. When I came out of prison, we talked about how you connected with raising my voice. I came out of prison after 21 years, and somebody said, you wouldn't want to go to this public speaking thing, would you? That's how they asked me about raising my voice. You wouldn't want to go. I said, why wouldn't I want to go? They said, well, you've been speaking in prison, and I have this thing. I've been doing presentations all my life. It started with, give me all your money. That's a presentation. Presentation. That's what it started with when I was, young. So I realized that I could do this. So I said, yeah, I want to go. I could learn something else. And it just evolved into me, ended up working for them. I worked somewhere else first with different organizations. And my thing is that we need people who understand us as people, because we have all these different organizations we can talk about, but a lot is not changing. So what we need is the base, the foundation to change.
What I can share personally, when I invited circles of support to St. Paul's, I was taken back by the lady I was introduced to. She's an alumni, and it was around Mother's Day. And we, like most churches, we have a Mother's Day luncheon. And I decided to have her speak. Well, mothers and Mothers at heart, how dare he bring someone to talk about prison and on Mother's Day to spoil our Mother's Day? Yeah. And we actually, he don't know this, and I'll bring this out. We had someone who actually staged a bag being stolen
Wow.
to prevent this program from coming to St. Paul's. Yeah. Someone staged it. Because in that area, you have a lot of stealing going on. And it was to say, we can't bring these. I said, no, that's not gonna happen. As long as I'm here, we'll work it out.
See, one thing you have to realize, most people who go to prison are coming back out. So if you put us in there and you say, you know, the hell with them, treat them this way, do that to them, I'm gonna be riding the elevator with you. Eventually. I went to prison, I had 21 to life. I got out. I mean, eventually you will get out of prison more times than not. So why would we want to put someone somewhere and treat them so poorly and then let them back out around our kids and ask them to be normal? We don't treat them normal. We make them do everything by these rules and this harsh treatment, this oppression. And even when they get out on parole, you a grown man, you a grown woman, you have to be home by 9 o'clock. Think about that, the pressure it puts on you. What if the train is late? What if this happens? What if I don't make it? See, all these things are not normal, but yet they want you to be normal. And they don't want you to get a job. I mean, oh, you've been convicted? Oh, but yet they want me to be a normal citizen.
And while you're incarcerated, you work 40-hour weeks and you get $9 is it $9 a week, $9 a day?
Well, no, it's definitely not $9 a day.
Not a day.
It might be $9 every 2 weeks.
Okay.
If you got a good job, it could be $9 every week, you know, in prison. And I mean, this does not prepare you for success. Like, this does not prepare you to become part of a community again. Because community is about common unity, like building together to lift something up. And that treatment there doesn't do that in prison.
One thing that I can also say when you ask, what are ways that you all can help? With the Releasing Asian People in Prison campaign, what we are trying to do is get 2 bills passed. The first one is the fair and timely parole bill, which would allow an individual who has done, I believe, 15 years of their time, and they've done their programs, and that's the elder parole.
Okay.
So the first one is fair and timely parole. That's for people, like, there's no age cap on that one. The other one is the elderly parole bill, which is for 55 and over, for individuals who have done over 10 years in their sentence, and they can show that they've done their programs. And one thing that we advocate too is, as doing advocate work, is that they have families to come home to. One,
New York State bills.
Yes, New York State
yes,
bills,
2 bills, which we are trying to get on the floor. We came this close last year. So we're actually doing a couple of campaigns next week and the rest of the year.
And when you talk about these bills, you can point out that statistics back this up. This is not just somebody said this. People age out of crime. As people get older, they don't commit crime. It's just the way it is. They become less risk takers. Like, things happen in their lives. So it's not like you letting people out that's going to commit crime again. Most of these old guys, I'm one of them, are not going to commit crime again. It's just out of your life now. So you're not just saying, I'm gonna let them out because they old. You say, I'm gonna let them out because they're not a threat either. So it makes sense.
And the other thing too that I always like to speak about is, what is redemption? What is rehabilitation? If you sentence, if Daniel said he was sentenced to 21 years. When he went in, I'm assuming as a teenager, look how he came out. I have not lived a perfect life, but looking at me, you don't know that, because I have changed. I've done things last week that I don't do today. So I believe that everyone, because that's what God says, deserves a second chance. And if the state who sentenced and put these individuals, and I do believe if you commit a crime, you should do some time for it. However, cruel punishment, and if you're not offering them any programs and resources to rehabilitate themselves. But what I have learned by doing this type of work is like when I meet a Thomas, when I meet a Caroline, is that all the guys and women that I work with that done 30 years, I'm working with them, learning how to speak, and they have their own organization, they have their own programs, they have their own houses, their children are in college, their children have done excellent things. So I do know, like he said, the recidivism rate is not what they will have you to believe, because these individuals have come out with a plan. And that's one thing my husband and I always talk about. What's the plan when I get out? Like, this is what I want to do when I get out, when I touch ground. First of all, I'm coming into your space because I have not lived there with you and our daughter. So I'm coming into your space. I have to adjust to your space at the same time. But this is my goal. This is what I want to do. I don't want to be on paper for 3 or 4 years because I want to live the life that I was robbed of. So I'm getting this second chance, and that's what I fight for.